Hi everyone, my name is Vlad Mamaradlo. I am the lay youth pastor at Saints Peter and Paul Church in Mississauga, and this is my testimony on St. Joseph. My first encounter with St. Joseph actually came through my grandmother. My dad's mom was very devoted to St. Joseph. He was her patron saint, and in fact, every Sunday, I remember as a child, whenever we would go to church, she would always wear green, as in our culture, in the Filipino culture, the color green is usually associated with St. Joseph. And on top of that, she had a green cincture around her waist called the cord of St. Joseph. And that was her way of showing her devotion and her connection to the foster father of the Lord, as a way of binding herself to his virtues, to his life, and to the example of his holiness. And her desire to reflect it, her desire to imitate his life in following the Lord. And she was actually quite specific in terms of her desire that at her death that she would be buried in green, which is the color of her patron saint, and with the cord of St. Joseph around her waist. So when she passed away in May of 2010, we honored her wishes and she was buried in green and with the cord of St. Joseph. I remember as a child spending a lot of time with my grandmother and having her form me in the faith, teach me a lot of the things about the faith, and especially about her favorite saint, St. Joseph. And her big thing about him is that she would always refer to him as the one who is an example of the faithfulness of God. The word in our dialect is matoo, and she always uses that word in reference to St. Joseph, saying that he's always faithful. Whatever I needed from him, anytime I needed strength, anytime I needed to experience the might of his intercession, he has always come through. And so for my grandmother, St. Joseph is a concrete example of the faithfulness of God, of the grace of God that is always there available to us. And so that has always kind of stayed in the back of my mind as, if you are in a situation where you're not sure of how God is moving or what God is doing, because everything seems so confusing, that one can turn to St. Joseph as an anchor. One can turn to St. Joseph as an example of what it means to lean on the faithfulness of God through the might of his intercession. And I experienced that in a very personal way in how my professional life unfolded. When I was in high school, we were at that point by grade 11, grade 12, when we were being asked to kind of consider what kind of studies do you want to do post-secondary, how do you want to, where do you want to go from here? And already I had felt in my heart a sense that God was calling me to some sort of ministry in the church, to some sort of service using my time, talent, and treasure in serving God's people. And yet the more I reflected, the more I discerned, and the more I prayed, the more I came to the realization that that call was not towards priesthood, and that call was not towards being a Catholic school teacher. And so I was left in a bit of a bind in terms of the early 2000s, the role of a lay youth pastor or a lay pastoral associate was not as common, and I definitely was not exposed to it as a child. It wasn't part of my experience in the faith. And so it wasn't something that I was aware of that was an option in our church. And so at that point, I was kind of conflicted in the sense that I had this desire. I felt that God was calling me towards this particular professional life. And yet, in my framework at the time, the only option I could think of was either to become a priest or to become a Catholic school teacher. And the more I reflected on either of them, the more I came to a conviction, those two were not where God was calling me. And so I asked myself, well, what does this mean? Where do I go from here? And that was where St. Joseph came in, because at one point I said, okay, let me take that leap of faith. Let me entrust this to St. Joseph. Let me take that leap of faith and kind of go into a program called Christianity and Culture offered at St. Michael's College at U of T that is geared more towards preparing you towards being a Catholic school teacher or possibly seminary. Finish that and then kind of see where it goes from there. Just kind of trust it into the hands of the Lord. And I said, St. Joseph, I'm entrusting this to you. And so, I did it. I went through it, 5 years of education, doing my undergrad, completing my bachelor in arts as in Christianity and culture. And at the end of it, again, I began having anxiety again in terms of, well, what do I do with this? Where do I go from here, given that I don't feel called to be a Catholic school teacher or to become a priest? And so again, I entrusted that to St. Joseph. And, when the Bible speaks of St. Joseph as the silent saint, in many ways, in my own kind of personal connection and intimacy with him, he has become a very silent saint, in the sense that I'm praying and there's only silence on the other side. And so I said, okay, let's keep going. Let me trust that God knows what he's doing. Let me entrust this to the care of St. Joseph. And so I did. And in 2008, I finished. In fall of 2008, I graduated, and I started applying everywhere and kind of to see, getting my foot in some sort of ministry in the church. And it was not easy. Number one, there weren't many opportunities. And every opportunity that I had applied for, it didn't work out. And so, I remember getting to Good Friday of 2009 and being very, very dejected, because I remember at one point, a few weeks prior to that, I was speaking to somebody about a possible job opportunity, employment opportunity. And he gave me the assurance that, you're a shoo-in, you're going to get this is yours. It's just the formalities. And, after giving him all my documents, my application and everything, I haven't heard from him. And so I kept calling him and asking him, any update on that position, and I haven't heard from him. And I finally see him on Good Friday at Mass, and then I asked him, any update on that position? And he said, it was filled. It was someone else. It was given to someone else. And I don't know what it was. Maybe it was just the waiting or everything else. But I felt the full weight of dejection at that point, in terms of, God, I trusted you all the way back in high school, right up to here, that, that you wouldn't, you know what you're doing, and that you're leading me towards something. And here I am, and I'm still in retail, and I hate every moment of it. I feel like I'm selling my soul every time I'm in it. I'm not doing what I like. And I went into a program that I can't find a job for. And what do I do? Where do I go from here? And I trusted you with this. And so that was a very low point in my life, to a point where I just kind of continued working and I stopped looking. Fast forward to July of 2009, several months have passed since Easter of that year. And then one of my friends said, I saw this employment opportunity at the Archdiocese website. You should check it out. And at that point, several months has passed, and I was just kind of over it, and I was done. And I have come to terms with the fact that I went into a program that I probably will not find a job in. And, I should just kind of be content with working in retail, at least for the time being. And so I wasn't really open to it. But he pushed me a little bit, and he said, you should really check it out. And so I looked into it, and it was a job opening, or at least it was a posting about an employment opportunity at a church in Thornhill called St. Joseph the Worker. And the pastor at that time was Father Mario. And I remember my very first encounter with him. It was August 5th, the Feast of Our Lady of Snows. And we had a long conversation, and it kind of just ended from there. So I wasn't sure, did I get it? Did I not get it? And I would not hear from him till October. It took him that long to decide and to discern. And end of October, he called and said, would you be open to, to working with me as the lay youth pastor here at St. Joseph the Worker? And I said, sure, let's see where this goes. And November of 2009, the Sunday of Christ the King, I was introduced to the congregation, and that began what I would consider today a journey that I could not have fathomed, either back in high school, throughout my university years, throughout the time that I was in retail. And the fact that I ended up working over 10 years at a church under the patronage of St. Joseph is, to me, a testimony of like what my grandmother said, his faithfulness and the very faithfulness of God, even through the silence and the confusion of it all, that God remains faithful, God remains good, and he remains wise, and that his plan is always the best. How these past 10 years at St. Joseph have been, it still overwhelms me. Thinking back and looking back, it overwhelms me with so much gratitude, because it is above and beyond more than what I could ever have hoped for or expected. And then now we continue that work here at Saints Peter and Paul. And to me, that is in a big part, due to the example and the protection and the intercession of St. Joseph, who, as my grandmother said, models for me the very faithfulness of God, notwithstanding and through the confusion and the storms of life. So I would encourage you in your own way, in your own life, to look back at how God has been faithful through the storms and the confusion, and how St. Joseph models for us in his own life and by the example of his virtues what it means to be faithful to God, what it means to trust God even when you don't understand what's going on. God bless you.